Alright, so this is a quick rundown on MGTOW, all men going their own way. In the interest of being open and frank with you, I wouldn't call myself MGTOW, but I do see its necessity for some. I've tried my best to give it a fair shake. So first off, this is an abbreviation, and it's men going their own way. Like Ron Seal, it does what it says on the tin. Men, quite obvious. Going, this refers to the internal philosophical journey or a personal struggle with their own way. Ultimately, this is just independence, agency and self-determination. So just to clarify, this is not an ideology. You'd be forgiven for assuming it as such, but it's not. They never tell you how to live. Rather, it's a community to caution others of the risks of romantic relationships with women. There's a common core set of beliefs that you'll often find in the MGTOW community, of which I will list some now. Marriage does not pass a cost-benefit analysis. Now, they believe you can't voluntarily enter into marriage without there being a looming doubt over your assets, access to your children and home upon a divorce that might just occur through no fault of your own. They also believe that society is gynocentric. The concept of gynocentrism asserts that women are favoured over men in most, if not all, circumstances. This makes sense evolutionarily, as women are the childbearers. You're much better off collectively if women survive to have their children, but with the sheer numbers we have today, it's somewhat antiquated. MGTOW interprets women's sexual selection as hypergamous, which basically means that women marry up. While dating, this is less apparent, but as they age and hope for commitment and children, this behaviour presents itself more frequently. This phenomenon is sometimes referred to as the 80-20 rule. It's used when describing the disproportionately large number of women chasing the top 20% performing men. Clearly the numbers aren't literal, it's derived from the Pareto principle. It's just a rule of thumb. MGTOW, in essence, is an assertion that you cannot trust women. There is talk in the MGTOW community of men considering paying a woman to have their children as surrogates so they can be the sole parent so as to avoid any such custody battles and risk the breakup of the family. This is the logical conclusion for a MGTOW man hoping to become a father. Now, why is it they believe these things? Specifically, it's a response to both perceived and real imbalances in power, rights, protections, and access to services in society and relationships. There's empirical data to suggest that there are issues, and no doubt you've heard plenty of anecdotal evidence. I suspect that the pervading sense that men are not needed anymore, vilified and ridiculed in mainstream media, normal boyish behaviour in school punished and drugged away, the list goes on. I suspect that these factors all work together in tandem in pushing these men away into exclusion. Now, who are these men? It's not unfair to say that the repudiation of the MRA's attempt to reform society and law may well have broken the spirits of these people, forcing them into the realisation that withdrawing from the institutions altogether is the only way to live freely and fairly. I'm assuming that not all of them are ex-MRAs. There's almost certainly a great many who were never activists to begin with, as the movement itself is characterised by inaction. It's safe to say that there is a very vocal minority of people in society who are haranguing, they're just hell-bent on punishing people that do not fall in line with their dogmatic belief systems. So the actual opportunity to have reasonable discussions is limited massively by that. Hopefully, if you just take a look at this clip of Peter Lloyd, who dared to challenge the traditional notions of family life and marriage, you'll see what I'm talking about.
All right, well, there has never been a worse time to be a man.
Tell me about it.
Really?
Yeah, according to a controversial new book, apparently men are being ridiculed, abused and exploited and have become second-class citizens. And guess what? It's all women's fault.
Well, by process of elimination, it would have to be, wouldn't it?
No, this is true.
Do you know what men need to do? They need to grow a set, really.
Well, Peter Lloyd is the author of Stand By Your Manhood, and he joins us live from London. very much for joining us. Geez, mate, where to start? You seem to be really angry in your book. What is it exactly that you have against women?
Nothing at all. I absolutely love women. I have to say, this may surprise you, but my mother is a woman. And, you know, I have 3 wonderful sisters who I love, but nobody ever is honest with men about the real world. And so, you know, we've had books like The Female Eunuch and How to Be a Woman by Caitlin Moran, and I just thought it was high time that us men had our version.
You say that women spend a lot of time looking for Mr. Right. They're very critical. You actually reckon blokes shouldn't get married. Why not?
Yeah, I do. Well, I mean, if I'm honest, marriage is a raw deal. It's a contract, and when it goes wrong for men, they often lose their home, they often can't see their children, they lose half of their fortune, and it can just be really psychologically damaging. I just think, have a great relationship, go for it, pursue love and everything, but just don't get married. It's a contract you don't need.
Oh, Peter, as a happily married woman for 11 years, I'd have to disagree with you. And really, how can you say men have been hard done by? I mean, what evidence do you really have to back that up?
Look, I know it sounds oxymoronic, but bear with me. It's like when somebody first tells you about infinity. You can't quite take it in at first. You have to keep thinking about it, but it's true. I've studied lots of empirical data, and, you know, from school, the school system is failing boys. Men are a minority at universities.
Really?
The life expectancy gap. Most universities have men as a minority group.
But they end up earning more later in life in their careers. They end up being on the boards of more companies. They end up running more countries. So it sort of seems a bit oxymoronic, as you put it, that you guys are being oppressed.
Well, look, it's true, but, you know, looking at who runs, you know, boardrooms and companies is only one way of measuring, you know, how equal society is. If you look at the heads of families, it's women
really
who hold all of it. It is oppression, really. I mean, it might not be the kind of oppression that we're used to seeing and hearing, but it's absolutely real.
So
Let me hold on, ladies. Give us a go. You've had a pretty good run.
Oh.
More men are incarcerated, more men kill themselves, more men die at war, more men are homeless. What's the problem with men?
Well, I think the big difference is that men have gender roles have changed so much in the last 50 years, but men are still programmed to be used on their utility. So men are considered disposable, and feminism, for all its, I mean, it's done some wonderful things, but at the same time, it's really kind of, you know, ignored a lot of men's issues, and they've just worsened over 50 years. So while women's liberation has kind of like gone like this, men's lifestyles have kind of gone like that. And all I'm saying in the book is, I'm not blaming women for these problems, but I'm saying, feminism, oi! It's time we started sharing the platform here.
Peter, do you have a girlfriend?
No, I don't. I'm single.
Funny.
Peter, in all seriousness, can I ask, how have you actually been oppressed by women? Like, has there ever been a time in your life where you think, you know what, those, you know, darn cotton-picking women have got one up on me, you know? Has it ever happened? Because I don't think it's ever happened to me. I don't think it's ever really happened to anyone I know.
Well, I mean, that is the common misconception, but so many of these things are so insidious. I mean, here in the UK, I mean, it's depressing to talk about, but male suicide is at an all-time high. It's at a 15-year high. And I know we're kind of joking about it here, but there are some really serious issues that are affecting men.
Are you saying they're killing themselves because of women?
About them.
Or they're killing themselves because of feminism?
Well, I mean, I think we have to be realistic here. I mean, it's a very complex issue, but certainly one of the things that is a contributing factor, I'm sure, is the constant denigration of men, like this casual, fashionable man-bashing we see all the time. I mean, I can take a joke, but it's relentless, and I think after a while...
One of the real problems with youth suicide, and particularly young men killing themselves, is that it's all taking place in rural and regional areas. They're not exactly hotbeds of university feminism, are they?
Well, I wouldn't say that was true. I mean, only 2 weeks ago, I had to go to the memorial of a friend who killed himself, and he was a doctor at one of London's best hospitals. So it's absolutely not just taking place in rural areas. And even if it were, feminism and this kind of man-bashing is so pervasive in the media. It's everywhere. You can't escape it. People say it's easy to be a man. I always say try it.
Is being pro-women really being anti-men? And after so long at the top of the tree, I mean, it's only been really 30, 40 years that women have started to find equal footing. I mean, is it more that you're just kind of getting a bit annoyed that your place at the top of the tree is being challenged?
No, crikey, I was never at the top of the tree. It was, look, my book is edited by a woman. All the experts I cite in the book are almost all women. Because this isn't about men versus women. I'm not interested in that. I love women, I respect them, I want them to be equal. It's exciting that we're on the eve of possibly America's first female president. But this isn't about men versus women. This is about unequal versus equal. If you look at men's health spending in Australia, I think men's health ranked 36th in the priority list. That is absolutely atrocious when our life expectancy gap is huge and it's increased massively over 100 years. No politician or any government body is doing anything about that. I mean, that to me does not sound like we are living, the life of Riley, basking in privilege. It's just not true.
Can't we just all get along?
Yes, let's do it. Together, let's make a difference.
I'm pretty sure hospitals treat people based on who's about to die soonest, rather than what gender you are. But anyway.
Well, look, it's a very controversial and a fascinating new book. Obviously, it's provoking a lot of talk, a lot of debate. Peter Lloyd, thank you very much for joining us and chatting about it. Certainly gets people talking, that's for sure.
Thank you for letting me talk about my manhood on live television.
No, it's all right. There aren't enough male voices in the media. I'm glad you get to have your say. So we're going to find out what...
That's not to say there isn't constructive discussions, though. Hopefully we're seeing an end to this culture of man-bashing, as the Red Pill film is about to debut on Amazon iTunes and Vudu on March the 7th. This clip of feminists and MRAs discussing the Red Pill highlights some of the progress made. MGTOW is seeing more widespread acknowledgement and subscription as third-wave feminists are increasingly in the public eye, vilifying and pushing men away to alternatives that consider their needs. You're expected to believe the sexes and rights they each have are more equal than ever before, and in some respects that's true. You would assume marriage rates would increase as there would not be an imbalance of risks and rewards each party takes on under that contract. This is where things differ. Unfortunately, we're not seeing an increase in marriage rates, but a decrease, and a disproportionately high decrease among the working classes and poor. This is often put down to marriage becoming increasingly moot, with all of the existing state-funded programs for mothers. But more importantly, it's because the cost of divorce is often life-destroying for men. The conception of no-fault divorce encouraged the notion that you can find Mr. Right, or the one, for men. This has allowed people the opportunity to avoid working on interpersonal and conflict resolution skills. It's a freedom, I think, along with the sexual revolution, that's helped pave the way for a diminishing in quality of character. The culture wars that see men and women pitted against each other as adversaries rather than allies in the struggle of life has helped erode away at traditional arrangements that allow for reasonable interdependency and the will to make it work. I'm sure you've seen the articles where women have complained there simply aren't enough men in higher education for them to marry. This is evidence of hypergamy. There's certainly no shortage of men, but there is a shortage of quality men to match the income and academic achievement of women who have excelled through the education systems, often criticised as having become feminized. Earlier, I mentioned that the sexual revolution has exacerbated the issues concerning commitment. It's because sex is probably one of the most powerful reward systems for man, when he's not getting much, or if there's a huge risk to it, like false rape accusations. there's less reason to work hard and earn it.
They're more likely to turn to violence.
Society functions on the bribery of youthful testosterone. I mean, if you don't have anything to offer young men in order to secure their compliance to social norms, they will not obey the social norms. And society is rapidly running out of bribe mechanisms of conformity for young men. And yeah, that's a huge challenge. Of course, getting married and having children are the two major things that manage male ambition and testosterone, and they're gone.
Well, you're also supposed to get some credit for that. You know, like the idea for this is also a very comical idea that marriage is a patriarchal institution. I love that argument. It's so blatantly idiotic that it's almost indescribable. But you can even think about it empirically. So we might as well do that instead of just insulting it, even though it's so stupid that you have to insult it. The only people who get married now are rich people. So you think, okay, so that means the rich women are voluntarily choosing to oppress themselves. That's the theory. So it's the rich women who've internalized the patriarchal oppression and have decided to continue being married. Or no, how about no? It's that things have destabilized so badly that only the rich can afford to be married now, and the poorer women are stuck. They're stuck terribly. And so, but if you buy the marriage as patriarchal oppression story, then men get no credit for being good. And so, like, I would say a good man is somebody who isn't a sexual predator. How about we start with that? That's something we could agree with the people on the left. But they encourage sexual predation constantly by saying that, well, you know, sex is just for pleasure and everyone can have exactly what they want when they want, and we should allow any form of sexual expression whatsoever and not discriminate against any of them. It's like, and then at the same time they say, but if a man ever makes a move on you that's not wanted, man, you better put him in jail. It's like, okay, how the hell are you going to have both those things at the same time? You know, and I just watched your video just a while back on the relationship between sexual, let's call it self-control or denial of gratification, delay of gratification, and societal stability. It's like, clearly.
It's exactly for reasons like these we're seeing MGTOW only increase in popularity. The feedback loop of women's liberation and protection, their belief, and a propagandist reimagining of the gender roles to push women into the world of work has not only made men less valuable, but also increased their competition for jobs in an already struggling economy. The trials and tribulations this generation is going through have been compared to the technological revolution of the 1880s, seeing similar levels of redundancies and automation compounded by both genders entering the workforce. The way I see it with regards to civilization is we should be striving towards voluntarism. Welfare for single parents, in my opinion, can only be justified when the partner flees or refuses to pay their fair share for looking after the child. Not alimony to cover a standard of living that's become accustomed to. What women are entitled to now essentially nullifies the concept of marriage to an irrelevancy. The most civilized approach would restore the spirit of marriage, repealing the no-fault divorce laws to allow people to actually work on relationships and be encouraged to practice personal responsibility. What with the prevalence of women in work these days, the gender roles have become somewhat merged, so removing gendered phrasing in law would allow for courts to treat both men and women equally as either provider or caregiver. If gendered language can't be revoked, a protest for double-blind representation where the genders of the people involved in separation suits can be omitted might be worthwhile. From what I've read, state involvement in the family has served only to deteriorate it. This insidious machination neglects the human spirit and need for familial cohesion, promoting liberation from personal responsibilities to one another, supported by taxation and welfare, your new obligation to the state. If you take money by force, then you strip any and all respect from that transaction. Men opting out of marriage because it's a gamble necessarily means they lose out on some respect, and without respect you don't get much in the way of loyalty, which in turn squashes enthusiasm to provide. The last couple of decades has seen the rise of herbivore men, who have treated the world of work and romance in equal measures of enthusiasm, working less, sometimes not at all, and entirely foregoing relationships. So this all essentially culminates in what I'll just call the MGTOW family. The extent they'll go to ensure there is no one but Child Protective Services who can strip their children away is admirable, but more concerning is how it highlights the fracture between the sexes. Arguably, to be raised by a single parent with a pathological distrust of the other sex is damaging, but at least it's a parent that's committed and are taking all the precautionary measures any good parent ought to consider when planning a family. Since this is all codified in law, I can't knock it. They're making sure no one can take their children away but the state. So to close this off, this has been an eye-opening journey for me. Before I endeavoured to explain this movement, I hadn't dug very deep, and considered it degenerate because it's characterised by inaction. But upon reading all of this material, I see now it's kind of a silent protest. If this is the only way men can guarantee their rights to custody and make sure they instil civic virtue in their children, then I can no longer condemn it. Researching this has been one of the most depressing things I've encountered, which is why it took me a little longer to muster the gumption to get this completed. So, to finish this off, as always, your reciprocation is much appreciated. Like, dislike, comment to let me know what you're thinking, and cheers.